Hi, my name is Vicky Poole. I am an ancestral healer and coach, and I'm here today to talk to you about ancestral healing in effective communication. Now, we can all talk, right? But can we talk effectively? Can we say something to somebody and know that they're going to understand exactly what we mean and not take offense to something that we've said? Effective communication allows you to be able to say what you really mean and how you really feel with no fear of judgment or pain being generated or felt by the other person. A really, really valuable skill. The ancestral healing side of it comes into things when we look back at how our language has been structured. So our past, we learned to talk, and we're going to come on to talk about this, is our past. We can never change our past. It's fixed in stone. But what we are able to create is our future, and our future can be created from whatever we want it to be. And as we grow up, we become more mindful of the words that we use. And what if we were to change some of the structures or implement some strategies so that we can create whatever we want today? Therefore, we can have the future today, and we can create the future that we want using simple language. Now, as human beings, our first kind of communication was about food, sex, and fear, which was essentially food, where's dinner? You know, what animals are around, what berries are available to eat, have you found any green beans, or any takeouts that may be around. In food today still comes up as a large part of our dialogue and our conversations with our spouse, our partners, our children. Sex, you know what? We all got to talk about sex. It's procreation. It's how the next generation comes along. It's something that we've always talked about. We're looking for mates, which continues the line. And then fear. We've all heard about the fight, flight, or freeze response. The fear was born out of that conversation of, don't go down that hole, there's a bear. So then instead of going down that hole or that cave, you develop a fear of the dark. And then as you have children and the time moves on, that fear becomes much bigger and much grander. And then it starts being a fear of the night. And all stems back to a control mechanism which minimizes change. Now, obviously, we're going back 10,000 years here, and we need to be looking at something more recent. So we are taught words. We're taught words from the day that we're born. But around about 2 years old, we start to say words. Earring, glasses, lipstick. We get to say words, and we string them together in the same structure that our parents use. So one of the biggest challenges that I faced when I moved out of Newcastle was moving down south. Not because the people were different, but because the language was different. In certain parts of Newcastle, because we do have a lot of regional dialects, a duck is a prostitute, as in a quack quack. Duck is a prostitute. Whereas if you go into the Midlands, "Hey up me duck" is a term of endearment. It's, "Hey, how you doing? Nice to see you." It's a very different language. So the language structure that I was taught at 2 years old was fundamentally different to one of the places that I was then living in. And I became really curious about the choice of words and being able to convey what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling effectively to others. Now, inevitably, you're always going to pick words that make sense for you, but not necessarily make sense to the other person, which is why effective communication is so valuable. Role models used to be our mum and dad. We would look at language structure, we would copy what mum and dad does, and we would expect this to be normal. Kids today, they have no privacy, and there is no privacy by anyone else either. So they have access to the whole world through social media. And the role models that, used to be the occasional star that was on, Top of the Pops, is now a YouTuber or a virtual blogger who's somewhere around the world. And your little people are being exposed to their language styles and their structures. So then all of a sudden we're mixed. It's not just a local or regional language style that we have anymore. We are adapting words from all over the world into our core language. You just have to look at pavement and sidewalk. Yes, it's words that describe the path that walks down the side of a road, but just imagine some of the differences and nuances that come with slang terms. Yabbleswacky is one that springs to mind for meaning slightly crazy and a lot of fun. So how do you move forward? How do you move forward from here? How do you change your language structure? Well, remove the fear. Now, I'm gonna share a story here to illustrate the point. Everything that we tell ourselves is a story. Is a story about my life. Is a story about my husband's life. Every single thing that we do, there's a story around it, and those stories are constantly replayed in our head. So our mind is nothing but a cinema screen that just keeps replaying certain stories and memories over and over again. Or if you're creative and you like to, and you have a wild imagination, they could also sit in imagination land. Or when kids kind of glaze over and drift away, they're imagining a world or or an experience of what it could be like and would be like should they experience it themselves. There's always going to be a dialogue in those movies, in those stories. And the dialogue that goes with those stories is paramount. Now, I'm going to jump in and share a story, which is personal to me. It's a piece of my childhood. And I want you to just listen and acknowledge the differences in the story and how it makes you feel. So, story one. As a child, I was subject to a lot of abuse, physical, emotional, and psychological. I was brought up to be a woman in a man's world, so I had to be really, really tough and strong. And the way that my parents made me be this way was to subject me to psychological abuse. So whenever I came home from school and something happened, they would taunt me about it so that I would develop a thick skin, so that the next time this came up, I was going to be unfazed by the event. It also meant that I didn't have a close relationship with my parents. And my parents' greatest life story was that by the time I was 18, I no longer needed them. They had taught me everything that they needed, and I could go off into the world by myself. In actual fact, I was incredibly lonely, and it was only going to be a few years' time before I was contemplating suicide as a mechanism of escape. And the mechanism of escape was driven to me, the thought process of suicide was driven to me because I was so lonely. Because I thought that this is the experience of my childhood was normal, every time somebody came to me with a problem, I'd taunt them about it. I had no friends. I had no one that I could confront, no one that I could speak to. I had no confidants. I was just that miserable person who would always sap the positivity and fun out of a room. I was unloved and I didn't love myself. Story two. Oh yeah, I had I had a really difficult childhood. I was subject to abuse from my parents as a child, and it wasn't really normal abuse, and I recognize that now. Looking back, whenever something happened at school, I fancied a boy or something, happened that I wanted to share with my parents, they'd taunt me about it so that I would develop a thick skin. And what I actually did was I developed a mask. So I'd be crying on the inside, but outside, nobody would ever know. I developed this amazing poker face. I was very, very stolid all the way through my childhood, teens, and indeed throughout my 20s. Because I was so terrified of actually letting anybody see how I was really feeling, because I just wanted that abuse to stop. Now, as I kind of grew up and I went through life, I finished my university career, bells and whistles, and went into a graduate job. I naturally fell into sales. And this mask that I had turned into a swan, because as the waters were kind of going crazy around me and life was manic and stressful, I appeared to be this wonderful swan who could glide across a river. And, I just looked elegant and beautiful. And nobody could see my state underneath going crazy. And what this actually allowed me to do was to move very quickly through the ranks. And in 15 years' time, I was a business development director for new logo and new acquisition sales, and was on a 6-figure job. Now, the difference in language changes the victim into a hero story. And when you're able to reframe some of the elements of your story, you start using different language. And when that language is then used, it starts being a negative and a drain, and it starts being something positive that spurs you on. So whilst my childhood abuse was terrible and I wouldn't wish it on anybody ever, it's something that allowed me to afford my lifestyle. It afforded me an opportunity to be in the right place to meet my husband. There was always something there about it, which is another way of being able to say, always find the positivity in any story, in any situation. And when that becomes the story itself, true magic happens, because it allows you to change the story. So now that we've started to talk about changing the story, effective communication is using words that it's words that allow you to be able to convey how you're feeling, that may or may not require an action of the other person. And it's clean language, it's judgment free, it's all about you, it's nothing about them. And it's things like, thank you for putting the washing away, that makes me feel good. It's all about me, it's how I'm feeling. It allows the other person to know that by doing the chore, it makes me feel good. You can also adapt that for the work environment, with your kids, with anything. And there are 3 main responses, or 3 main elements to this. It's clean language, judgment-free, and it's a structured response. Now, the structured response that I find more simple and easy to use is from Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication. It's now more effectively known as compassionate communication. And the later editions include a lot more hip language, so to be able to connect with the younger generations more. I personally prefer the original release, because the structure of it, I think, relates to a lot more adults, and we can then adapt it to use with our children. And those 4 steps are observe, feel, express your needs, and a request. So what do you need the other person to do? And I always use the Heinz tomato ketchup example when I'm explaining this in class. During COVID, my husband would go out and do the shopping. He'd come back and he'd miss the tomato ketchup on the shopping list. And I go, dude, where's the tomato ketchup? And then I'd wait. Now, I'm feeling angry and upset because he's forgot the tomato ketchup. He knows it's a Friday night. He knows that we're going to have fish and chips first Friday of every month, treat night. It's fish and chip night. You have to have fish and chips with tomato sauce. It's a northern lass, it has to be done. My husband stood there and he's thinking, oh my God, I've just braved COVID in a supermarket, and she's moaning about the one thing that I forgot. And before you know it, tensions are rising, tensions are flaring, and something needs to change, something needs to be done. If I had structured my communication in a different way, for example, thank you, darling, for doing the shopping. Observe. I noticed that you've, forgot the tomato ketchup. We're having fish and chips on Friday night, and I really, really need to have tomato ketchup with my fish and chips. Would you like to go out now and buy the tomato ketchup, or shall I do it later when we go and get the fish and chips? It then gives my husband the opportunity to choose how to respond. Is he going to go back out and brave the masses again? are we going to wait and get a sachet with the fish and chips? It then becomes his choice, and then how he responds, it allows me to know what I need to do next. I'll talk about some of the applications. They are indeed incredibly varied. Another brilliant one is about a child who is playing too many computer games. Honestly, you know, I'm concerned about how much time you're spending on the computer. I would feel more comfortable if you'd spent more time outdoors socializing in person. I'm wondering, you know, how you'd feel about that. Now, and you can adjust the language to make it more hip, to be able to connect and liaise with your children. But when you get the structure down, you can transfer it and relate it to other people. But of course, you know, making the change to a language structure that we have had since, you know, we are 2 years old is going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. So there's something that I'd like to share with you now that has saved my bacon on several times. And that is the DoOver process. So what is the DoOver process? Well, we can never stop ourselves from knee-jerking. So we get asked a question, we knee-jerk into a response. Now what happens is that our subconscious brain is engaged and it triggers a response that we give. And then when our conscious brain has a time to catch up, it goes, oh, I really wish I'd have said something else there. Oh, dang it. The time has passed. I can't go back and correct that. But you can. You can. And you use the DoOver process. Now, I've got a couple of stock phrases that are going to come up in a moment's time. But I wanted to kind of share the benefits of this, because this can be done live in real time. So you can say something and you can see the look in someone's face and you can go, I wasn't expecting that result. I wasn't expecting that response. Let me think about this. Now that I know your feelings, let me think about it and we can come back. Or it could even be, you know, a couple of hours later when you've had a chance to think about what was said, how the other person reacted. You can then come back to the table and go, now that I'm more aware of what's happening and what your feelings are, can we do this instead? Can we come back? Can we try and do this again to get an outcome that we're both in favor of? So, you know, I've got some stock responses there. So I acted without thinking earlier. I've had time to think and I'd like to revisit our conversation if you are comfortable with that. All about me. All about me. I acted without thinking. You know, I want to be able to change, you know, but the other person needs to be in a place where they're happy to support you in doing that. I wasn't expecting your reaction earlier and it caught me off guard. Now that I'm aware of your feelings, I'd like to come back to the conversation if you are happy to do so. So I'm taking ownership of what I said and how I said it. And now that I've had a chance to think about it, we can come back. We can have that conversation. We can then make a change. And a really great, if you have young children and you realize that you're becoming your parents and you want to be able to change that, there's a really great 5-step process, which is what can I relate to as a child that's happening right now? What did my parents do? How did it make me feel? How did I want to feel? And what would my parents need to make me feel like that? And you do this. Now that can be saying things in a different way. It could be more inclusion, bringing them in and explaining what's happening, or it could quite simply be just giving them what they want. Now, that's a completely different conversation, a completely different topic that I won't be talking about today. So the key to success with changing anything is patience, compassion, and practice. Patience, because it is something new that you are going to learn. Compassion, because you are going to mess it up and you need to have compassion for yourself. And practice it. Actively practice it. Without that practice, you're never going to be competent in it and you're always going to slip back into old ways. So thank you very much. My name's Vicky Poole. I'll put my details up there. If something that we've spoke about today has triggered something in your mind and you'd like to know more, I'd love to hear from you and see what we can do together to move things forward. Thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.